Hello, Nudgestock. I'm delighted to join you today as we experience all things BS. I'd like to share with you a perspective on the evolution of behavioral science as I've witnessed and experienced it over my years across Ford Motor, Toyota, Kimberly-Clark, and now with the Coca-Cola Company. So when I started my career back in 1991, teams responsible for sensory science, product performance testing, usability testing, user experience design, human factors engineering and ergonomics provided a common pathway for applying social science outside of academia. The turn of the century ushered in a period of what I call awakening. So this was that time when there was that acknowledgement in the private industries that human emotions should probably move up in the food chain a bit and complement functional benefits for brand building and innovation. So the questions of that time were, how do we frame emotions in the context of decision making? How do we measure emotional reactions? And how do we increase our engagement with consumers? At that time, neuroscience techniques were reimagined as a response to some of these questions. And we began to see more images of icebergs than the Titanic did as a metaphor suggesting the need to go beyond surface understanding of human motivations to reveal root causes of emotion and behavior. A decade later, the terms behavioral science and behavioral economics emerged, accelerated by the iconic induction of System 1 and System 2 by Daniel Kahneman. And thank you, by the way, Dr. Kahneman, for making my job a little bit easier. Capability building in behavioral science and adoption of even more easy to digest models of behavior, like BJ Fogg's BMAP model, were running at a fever pitch. Plug and play applications and proof points of implicit System 1 methods and cognitive heuristics became the standard for building internal credibility, increasing resources in this burgeoning field, and accelerating the adoption of BSci principles and behavioral models across an organization. And soon we began to witness the proliferation of government-supported behavioral insights teams, behavioral consultancies, and yes, client companies embracing the potential for what BSci can do to improve consumers' lives as well as a company's revenues. Now, let's accelerate our time machine to present day, where the COVID-19 pandemic has thrust behavioral science to the forefront of most discussions in industry, with the million-dollar question being, what behaviors will persist in a post-COVID world, and how can we be better prepared for the next global behavioral disruption? Beyond COVID, we now acknowledge the need to integrate data science with behavioral science and ask the right questions from the beginning in order to get the most out of the data that we are receiving. True behavior is coming through more and more via clicks in social media and web searches. This requires us to embrace AI technology to mine this data and then leverage behavioral science to interpret the data. No longer can we afford to rely solely on a research report to empathize with consumers. We must be willing to actually leave the confines of the office to stand in our consumers' shoes, adhering, of course, to any social distancing guidelines. But one thing is for certain. Behind every business problem to be solved, there is a human problem to be solved. And that makes human behavior inextricably tied to the success of any business. Behavioral science is the multivitamin of consumer centricity. So whether it's your consumer, your shopper, your customer, your mill worker, your safety manager, your supply chain function, your value chain model, there is a human heartbeat at the core of your solution, your countermeasure, and your strategy for growth. And it is up to us, this community at Nudgestock, to figure out what makes that heart skip a beat to the tune of delight or disgust. And doing so will require us to move beyond plug and play to a future where we more deeply understand our humans' problems to be solved, and then act with conviction and urgency on those insights as if the very survival of our business depends on it, because it does. Thank you so very much, Nudgestock, for having me, and enjoy the rest of your event. Bye now.